Welcome to the Easy Speak Speakeasy.
You've unlocked the door to unfiltered mental health and wellness conversations. Okay, so
the time has arrived for episode 8. I feel so great. It is late. It's time for some wine. Just in time.
Because we are fine.
Yeah.
All right.
Here we go.
Here we
baby.
go. We've got some Pinot Noir, which is like my favorite type of wine.
Yes,
ever.
and this bottle was gifted to us by the one and only Allison.
Our amazing executive assistant. If you've had the pleasure of ever interacting with Allison, you're welcome. Because she's great.
You're welcome. And if you haven't had a chance to interact with her, then you're welcome in advance for whenever you do.
Yes, if you're lucky. She keeps us on track and is just so sweet and amazing. So.
And as Mark would say, immaculate vibes.
Immaculate vibes from Allison, always.
Always.
So shout out to Allison for this bottle. I tried so hard not to spill wine on myself, but inevitably.
You did?
I have a little drop, but that's okay. It's fine. It's just hazards of the job.
It is. Every job has its little hazards.
Yes.
And this one is #where we spill drink.
Yes, that's right. Cheers.
Cheers.
Also, check out our chalices. Right?
If you're listening to this, again, you might want to watch.
This is a chalice, right?
Take a sip, because we cheersed. Cheers?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yum. Oh, Allison, slay me.
Oh, Allison, yes.
Slay me.
Episode 8, we're talking about the Podunk Pipeline.
Yeah.
And let's just say from the very beginning that this is an episode that could actually film for 17 days straight.
Like some people who sit in the ER for that long waiting for mental health services.
100%.
Yeah.
It's a big topic.
It is.
So we're going to take off bite-sized pieces, and I think probably come back to visit little, the little nuggets that we're going to touch upon today.
Yeah.
But I think we just want to talk about, in general, some of the things that have been bubbling up in the news and in the world.
Yeah.
Recently.
Yeah.
And then we're definitely going to be dedicating future episodes to each one of these individually.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's come up in our previous discussions anyway, right? Like just the fact that mental health services are so hard to access and the entry points are not ideal, and there's just lots of challenges around it. And so, this morning I was telling you that I woke up to a story on NPR where they were essentially talking about a topic that's really interesting, which is involuntary commitment for mental health challenges, which, is a level of care that is kind of like the end of the line, where that's how we would see it, right? That somebody's going to be involuntarily hospitalized for mental health challenges, that's like the last thing we try. But it was an interesting concept of having involuntary commitment for outpatient services, which is something I had never thought of before, but I thought was an interesting concept to help alleviate some of the challenges, where people need help way before they get to the end of the line. And a lot of times there are opportunities to help people, but because of the way the system is set up, we have to wait for the last shoe to drop in order to access care. Mm-hmm. And that's always been a frustration point for me as I look at the system as a whole. But yeah, I thought it was an interesting, and there are people who are all for it, and then there are people who aren't. And I also think it's an interesting distinction as I think back to the article that I read, that the people who are all for it were people who had lived experience. Mm-hmm. And the people who weren't were systemic folks. So that's an interesting.
Yeah. Which
thing.
is not, I think, that surprising for us, right? This is something that we see every day with our Pearl model that we have talked about here, our psychological enhanced response liaisons who use their expertise of their lived experience to be providing supports to families and to professionals. But so often their role is to do liaising between people who are not in alignment around what they believe the next course of action should be for a kid or a family. And, you know, that is not surprising to me when we were reading that article that people were not, you know, that is where sort of that fracture came, was between the people who have actually walked the road and the people who were watching the people that walked the road. Right? It's always totally different when you're on the journey and when you're not. Our, just in case you hear any prancing around today, our chief of cuddles, Luna, is joining us in the studio. She's a beautiful standard poodle hailing from Brockton, Massachusetts.
She is. She's gorgeous.
Also,
From Michaela.
therapy dogs
I know.
and therapy animals for the win.
Therapy dogs have come in handy a lot this year.
Yes.
In my world. It's especially for kids. It's
Yes.
like such a huge, I mean, for everyone, but it can really make a difference for a kid.
I don't know if they use therapy dogs with kids that are boarding in EDs. This is something that I haven't heard of that I think would be.
Probably not. I've never seen a dog go through an ED.
I think there's
Probably so much red tape.
so
around
much,
that.
regulation, but
Yeah.
this would be great. Anyways, I used the word
Boarding.
just now, boarding, yes, that a lot of people don't know that may be listening.
Yeah.
So to back up a step
Yeah.
from where we were, which was the fracture between lived experience folks and professional folks that sometimes exists.
Yeah.
Boarding is when a person, youth or adult, any age, is in an emergency room waiting to receive care. And so this is something that is part of the Podunk Pipeline, right?
Yes.
People waiting to receive appropriate care for their mental health
Yep.
for days, weeks,
Yep.
months.
Yep.
And I think that one of the things, you know, when I first started on my own journey with my son and his mental health was finding out that there was such a thing as boarding. I was literally on the floor. I was like, I don't even know what you people are talking about, but there's never going to be a day where I'm sitting in an emergency room for days. Like, what are you talking about? You go to the emergency room
for a couple hours.
They give you
max.
a scan of your arm and they're like, hey, your arm's broken, and they put a cast on it and you go home. Or like, you know what I mean? They do a CAT scan and they're like, you need to be admitted for whatever, and you get admitted. Like, what are you talking about? You're in an emergency room for more than one day.
It's crazy.
Like, explain this to me.
Right. But it happens every day. The other day I was listening to the radio. There were like 700, almost 800 people boarding in the ER waiting for psychiatric placements.
That day.
That day.
Like,
That day.
That day in time.
Yes, that moment in time. Which is
800 people were sitting in emergency rooms waiting to get mental health care.
Right.
That is such a wild.
And if you're in a mental health emergency, right? Like this is the thing, right?
Take sip of wine.
Take a sip, because it's like
take gulp of wine.
If you think about what a mental health crisis looks like, the ED does nothing but fuel that fire, right? Mental health crisis looks like someone who's overstimulated, who isn't channeling their emotions well, who may need time and space away from people and distractions. And the ER is just loud. The lighting is horrible. It's just
don't take a selfie in the ED.
It's a sensory nightmare. Like, you walk in there and you're like, right? And so you're in there for days. And so
weeks or months.
And what we've always said is that there's so many opportunities before a family gets to that point where they need to be in an ED in order to access a higher level of care that we could help, right? And so I think that was the point of the article from the family's perspective. They featured a family in that article about involuntary hospitalizations. They wished that they had the option for involuntary outpatient treatment because they felt like if their loved one had to go to outpatient treatment that they would have gotten the help that they needed. And they had a really horrible outcome as it relates to his mental health. And I just feel like, you know, it's an interesting thing because on the one hand, we're saying, yes, but involuntarily having somebody attend outpatient treatment could get them help. But I've also been a therapist sitting across from somebody who didn't want to be there, and I didn't feel like I was being helpful. You know what I mean? So it's just like an interesting thing because I understand the spirit of it, but then from a practical standpoint, it poses some challenges, which is what I think a lot of the like other people were saying.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, I definitely feel like in terms of being somebody who comes from the place always first as a lived experience coach and having like walked the line that, you know, I feel like having somebody be engaged is really important, you know. However, when I think about especially youth, right, which I think like a lot of our focus is on youth mental health, you know, youth, especially therapy, is really about getting into what it even means to be in a therapeutic setting, right? There's so much to learn about what it means to even engage in that type of a setting. And, you know, people I think sometimes feel like, oh, well, you can just, you know, make your kid, you know, do X, Y, and Z. And that's a pretty difficult thing when it comes to mental health. It's not that easy. And you do have to find somebody who's skilled and who's willing to go down the line of continuing to try to engage with somebody who doesn't want to be there. Right. And so it's the right provider and it's the right, you know, the right provider that's going to work with somebody like that.
Yeah.
I do feel like for me, like as a mom first, I would much rather have my child be mandated to have some sort of outpatient service than for them to not have anything, right? So in this article, they're essentially the judge is looking at, is this person a danger to themselves or others? And at the time, they weren't, right, based on what was currently happening. But somebody's mental health can formulate and change, and as people get older and have more ability to do different things and move different places in the world, you know, you have to take more things into account. And so I think for me, I would want my child to end up being mandated to a therapeutic service that hopefully they make a connection with somebody and start to learn about therapy and work through those feelings, than the latter, which is they end up off somewhere or they fall into, you know, the wrong group of people because their mental health isn't really allowing them to think as clearly as they typically would. Or they end up getting in trouble with the law. I mean, this is a whole nother like Podunk Pipeline of like the mental health to prison pipeline or the school to prison pipeline, right? Like these are so many different places where the mental health services fall off. And for me, I would much rather say mandate. There are a lot of other things than therapy, right? There's, you know, like a day hospitalization. You know, that to me, I think is an ideal secondary mandate than being inpatient psychiatric. So
Yeah,
for those
like
that
the
don't know,
partials.
like a partial hospitalization, which
Yeah.
is where somebody goes to a very intense hospitalization for, X number of days. It's usually around 10 days, I think, people are typically there, which is typically what an inpatient is as well, but it always depends on how the person is doing. But they go to this program every day for a full day, and they're in a very intensive setting, 8 hours. Then they come home every day, and then they go back the next day.
Right.
So that would be, for me, I feel like an ideal next step, instead of, if maybe you have somebody who isn't suicidal or homicidal, but they definitely need some kind of an intervention. If you could mandate them to a partial hospitalization,
Yeah.
this could be a great thing.
Yeah.
Much better
true.
than just saying, sorry, there's nothing we can do.
Yeah.
And then now you're back to leaving families who are
with
stuck in
kids-
services.
With kids, it's not usually an issue with kids though, right? Because if the parents want to send them, the parents just send them, right? In terms of having a mandate. I think with this article, it was an adult loved one, right? So somebody who technically is an adult that, legally can choose to make their own decisions, which I think is where like some of the challenges lie. But yeah, with kids, I
But
think
kids
for sure.
still get mandated.
Yeah, because sometimes the family, it maybe isn't in agreement that that needs to happen, then,
Or sometimes they just feel that the youth is so acute
Right.
that they don't see another option. Sometimes a family feels that they can't manage
Yeah.
the youth's care
Yeah.
at home,
Right.
but there's not really great options.
You're right. That's the part that's challenging
right.
across the board is the
Yeah, I
lack
think
of
there's a lot of
options.
kids where if parents could get their kids into like a partial hospitalization,
Yeah.
where they could bring them there every single day. Now, this would be a huge
There was one program here in
challenge for.
Massachusetts.
There are programs,
Yeah.
but I think the mandated part,
Oh yeah.
like if your kid is pretty acute and they need that intensive level of support, but are not really able to get that through the systems that they're currently interfacing with, and you can get in front of somebody who can mandate that,
Yeah.
that can really help a lot of families, I think, avoid, because people get into cycles of hospitalizations.
Yeah, and there's that whole thing too. I think the reason why people get stuck in that is because, as we discussed earlier, there's the different entities fighting over who's supposed to foot the bill, essentially.
Right.
And so that leaves a parent or family members oftentimes in that limbo of, my kid needs this service, but for some reason we're not being able to access it. Maybe they're full or whatever the case may be. But if a judge were to mandate it, then, mandates come with pipelines, I think, probably, right?
Oh, for sure, yeah.
So,
Yeah, everything's attached to something.
yeah.
Yeah. I think the other thing, just in thinking of like pipelines and the way that systems are currently set up, is when families get stuck in that like pipeline of repeat hospitalizations.
Yeah.
A lot of times that is because when kids go into higher levels of care, the limits and the expectations for those kids drop significantly.
Yeah.
So they don't have to go to school, which is usually a place of high anxiety or challenge that's happening in their life. And they're in a program because they're there for assessment for their mental health.
Yeah.
And they have, a few hours of school that they're mandated to, like in that program.
Yeah.
But if they don't want to go to school that day, nobody's going to really force them to go because they're really there for their evaluation of their mental health.
Yeah.
And so
I think school
kids
shouldn't
get
even be a part of
savvy
it.
with this
Yeah.
situation though, right?
Yeah.
Because like then they know, well, okay, I'm inpatient and I don't have to go to school and I can avoid this thing and avoid my challenges that are happening in my life. And when they're discharged from the hospital and they go home, then they become very acute again.
Yep.
And they end up like hospitalized again. And,
Right.
and families now get stuck in this pipeline
Yeah.
of they're trying to keep their kid home.
Yeah.
And their kid keeps getting readmitted into the hospital.
Right.
And so many times
That's
I've
where
been...
you follow the behaviors. That's
Yes.
what I always say to educators. It's like, you think that kid who's always being sent to the principal's office doesn't want to be there?
Right.
Like,
You think
they
really
got
hates
you.
it?
Yeah. That kid literally is like, if I say whatever in Miss Johnson's class, she is going to get upset and send me to Mr. Riley, and then I don't have to deal with the fact that I hate math.
Yeah.
Or it gives me anxiety, or whatever the case may be.
I was having this conversation with my daughter the other day that everybody makes decisions in their life, good or bad,
Yeah.
because they're getting some kind of,
Right.
like, not necessarily reward, but
Right.
they're reaping something from
Right.
the decision that they're making.
Right.
People do things for positive attention or for negative attention or for lots of different reasons.
Right.
But when we're talking about people who are struggling with their mental health, this becomes very complex.
Yes.
And I think what happens is when systems start to see these kids that now they start to get labeled, right?
Yeah.
As repeat offenders.
Yeah.
And the recidivism on this kid, and you
Yeah.
know, like all of these sorts of things, these different like labels start getting tagged on the kid, then the family now starts to be to blame. Even if the entire time they're like, listen, my kid doesn't want to go to school because
Yeah.
school is really hard.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get X, Y, and Z school thing. This
Yeah.
is where like we talk about this pipeline, right?
Right.
I'm trying to get the school to like do this thing.
Yeah.
But my kid keeps getting hospitalized because
Yeah.
they're doing this thing. So
Yeah.
the school can't do this evaluation because the kid is always in the hospital. And like,
my
what do you want me
God.
to do?
Yeah.
And everybody's like, be a better mother.
Yeah.
Right? And
You're
it's
like, I know.
then you go like this. Do you want to meet me for drinks later? Gulp.
This is the gulp.
Stop it, Diana.
So,
You know, which by the way, it's not bad if you go and have drinks with your friend because
No.
you had a stressful day.
No.
Because every single system in this podunk pipeline just told you that you're a horrible parent.
yeah, no, it's so bad.
If you're struggling with drinking, we will put a link in the description,
Yes.
because if it's more than I've had a day
Yeah.
and you feel like it's more than that,
Yeah.
or people have said that they're concerned about you, then you should pay attention to that as well. But if you've
Yeah.
had a day,
Yeah. I know.
listen,
I know.
sometimes the wine is fine
The wine is fine.
when you're riding the line over the course of time. I'm really rhyming today.
Oh, shit. You're like
I might spit a
freestyle?
freestyle today. I don't know. I don't
Podunk
know.
Pipeline freestyle.
A podunk pipeline freestyle.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, it's
The
just...
green room would go crazy
Oh,
if I had a freestyle moment.
they're the, what is it? The invisible green room today? Something like
Yeah.
that? Yeah. It's all dark in there. Very vibey.
And now they have the chief of cuddles in there with them.
Yes, thank goodness.
It's a vibe in there.
It's a good
Not as much as out here
situation.
though.
No.
Not as much as the speakeasy.
Speakeasy is vibey.
Easy speak. At the easy speak. Woo. Chicka.
That's my favorite.
That's my favorite.
That was good. That was so good.
Channeling a little MJ there.
I
think.
know. I like it. A little twist. A little MJ twist.
So there were some other things that we talked about regarding this Podunk pipeline.
Yeah, we talked about
Boarding, mandatory outpatient mental health, inpatient mental health. We talked about agencies, which we mentioned like for just a quick second there, but
yeah.
I think, and we talked about this in our last episode I think it was our last episode, Comorbid AF, where we talked about how hard it is to navigate the different systems.
Yep.
At different times when you have different diagnoses.
So much going on, yeah.
Yeah. And when you're trying to figure out who pays for what, or trying to get a service, this is where you absolutely get into a podunk ass pipeline.
It's true.
Because everybody's like, we're poor.
Yeah.
You've never seen so many poor people as when your kid needs a mental health service.
Yeah. Yep. Agencies just like...
I've literally been I will walk around and be like, how does nobody have any money?
Well, the interesting thing is, if you think about it, and part of the reasons why a lot of people told me that if I went into the mental health field, I would never make any money, right? Like, they tell you this as professionals. They're like, don't, like, just know. I remember being in school to be a counselor. They're like, you guys know you're not going to make any money, right? And I remember being like, why would you ever, first of all, ever say that as a manifestation thing? Like, I remember being like, no, I will be. But like, also... You're
like, stay out my pocket.
I'm like, mind your business.
Thanks so much.
But it's not even about that for me. It's also like the organizations, the reason why they say that is a lot of the organizations that deliver mental health services are nonprofits, right? And so there's that aspect of things where there's limited funding, right? And we know that world from having our own nonprofit and trying to do amazing things, and you gotta fight for the money, right? And so there's that. But then I also think that it's all around. Insurance companies don't pay the same for mental health services as they do for physical health services. So if you're a psychiatrist versus like
a
cardiologist or a plastic surgeon, you're not making the same amount per visit. And so, yeah, it's kind of a thing that's real, that they don't have money. And so then you look past that level and you're like, okay, so now we're talking about policies, right? And we're talking about, parity in mental health care, like making sure that insurance companies pay for it and at an equal rate, or, give people access. But yeah, I think all of that is the result of a long-standing view that we've had in this country of mental health being an afterthought, right? We'll get to it when it becomes a thing we have to get to, versus something that like we have to consistently be fostering and looking into and caring for, and like, just like we have to brush our teeth every day, or like go see our doctor for a physical once a year. Like, it really all boils down to that. And so, as complicated as it is, all the interplays, it's like, at the end of the day, if we were able to like refocus our energy and efforts like from the topmost levels across the board, if we have laws that back the policies that can then make sure the dollars flow in the right direction, I think we'd be in better shape.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing that I think is infuriating, is that we know that the money is around, right? It's just like, it's not in the correct places. And I think that's what's frustrating for families, especially like when you're new to this, right? Like, once you get far along down the road, you're like, okay, I'm gonna have to fight for money today, right? But especially in the beginning,
it's hard.
You're used to like, you have healthcare and something has happened and you go and you have a copay or a deductible, or even if your deductible is like a wild amount, like you know that you're still going to be able to get the care that you need. And you can figure out the deductible like at a later date, right? Like that's not how it works in mental health. It's like, find the money. And then call me back. And it's like, wait a minute.
It really does. Like, the interplay of that is so crazy. It's so crazy. I remember working, for a short while, I was an emergency services clinician, which was one of my like favorite roles in the mental health field. It was like somebody needed something in the moment, and we got to them quickly in the community or in the local hospital. But I remember like being on the back end after I had seen a child, talked with the family, and going back and then now having to like talk with the insurance company So I've seen the child, I've seen the family, I know their story, I've been in their home, I saw the hole he punched in the wall, and I'm like talking to them about like this family needs help, like this is their coverage, like, and then they like, it's just computers, like they go on the back end, they put in bits and pieces of information that you have, and they're like, well, they qualify for this package, and you're like, but that's not.
You're like, no, I wanted the #1 deluxe.
Yeah, I'm like,
you're like, I want the lettuce and the tomatoes.
Yes.
Why? What is this plain cheeseburger?
Why is it so plain and bland? And season your food, okay?
Do any black people work here?
This is a segue.
This seasoning is not correct.
It's not correct. It's missing a whole lot. And so like so I had to learn, I remember as a clinician, one of the first skills in that setting was learning the formula that would get me the result I knew I needed. So then I would have to take what I heard with the family and make sure that I translated that in a way that would fit the algorithm so that they would get the deluxe package. So
tell me about the algorithm again.
Listen, tell me.
You broke the code.
I broke the
You're
code.
Like Neo from The Matrix.
Yeah, I was like, they need to hear me say acute 8 times. And then on the 9th time, they'll be like, how acute is it? And I'll be like, extra. And they'll be like, okay, we'll pay for it.
This
Fine.
is so true. I can't. This is the best breakdown I've ever heard. I'm flabbergasted.
It was a whole art form. But yeah, it's just like,
That's it.
You got to know how to translate, we talked about that today with our pearls, which I thought was a really helpful way for them to conceptualize the role as they were stepping in to being psychological enhanced response liaisons.
Yeah, because families have to learn to do this, right? Like, this is how you advocate and get the appropriate services as quickly as possible, is by cracking the code, right? Like, you gotta pull out the plunger,
the playbook
for this Podunk Pipeline, and be like, clog. Like,
you said plunger, and I'm thinking like you need like a little vision board where you write down your goals.
And I'm like, hit the toilet again with the plunger. It's a literal crapshoot.
It is. It really is. It's so crazy. Yeah, it's one of those things that, I think, again, it comes up in like every conversation. The access issue, but then it's like, okay, once you're in the system, are you in the right place? And are you not in the right place because you don't have the right insurance, or because there's nobody specializes in that in your area, or you can't get there, whatever the case may be. But at the end of the day, what gives me hope is throughout the years, I've met a lot of people who have been focusing on mental health, and even though we're still working a lot in silos, I feel like I know of so many dope projects that are attempting to bridge that gap and like take us out of this like prehistoric mental health system.
Literally.
And so I have hopes that one day, all of the different facets will come together in a nice cohesive way. And I really, really, really feel like that starts with like legislation. So I was really happy to hear about that piece of legislation this morning. It's going through the process, and we'll see where it goes, but I would love to have somebody on here as a guest who like is working on mental health legislation. That would be amazing.
I would love that.
That would be amazing.
And I think it's important to have somebody that's on here talking to us about it for a number of reasons. Like, I feel like the only time that we really hear about it is or for me, I feel like, I'll say from my perspective,
Yeah.
is when it's in the news.
Yep.
Or I get like a newsletter that's like,
Yeah.
this thing is happening, you know, like sign this petition,
Yeah.
you know, and I'm like, okay, there's got to be something between those two pieces.
Yeah.
And, you know, so
Yeah.
many families, I feel like, would love to be active, and everybody has a different level of what activity looks like, you know? And it's like we always say, many hands make light work, right? So like, how are we collectively looking at what's happening out there and saying like, these people are great at getting a bunch of people together to go to the State House. These people are great at letter writing. These people are great at making phone calls. Like, you know, it's like that, like the groundwork that happens when you're working in the community, that grassroots work.
Yeah.
And I feel like when it comes to what's happening in politics with mental health, that gets lost.
Yeah.
I'm always just like, oh, that's great that just happened or is happening tomorrow and there's no way I can go.
Yeah. You're like, thanks for emailing me today about tomorrow. Thanks.
So I would love to have somebody on that not only talks about how people can get involved, but I also feel like it's a little like behind the curtain of like what the actual process is like to make these changes happen.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I feel like we always talk about with Pearls, and, you know, I've talked about in the different agencies and systems that I've worked with over the years is when you pull that curtain back and like let people know what's happening, it relieves anxiety. It helps people understand better. You know, it's like, I always like, when I talk to people about this, I always compare it to like the day before you're gonna have like a surgery or you're going into like a doctor's appointment for something that you're unsure of. It's like that level of anxiety of not knowing that happens is always worse than the doctor's appointment or the surgery. Once it's over with, you're like, oh, like I had myself all worked up for nothing, right? But when you don't know, your mind goes to like all of the like worst case scenarios and comes up with like the most wild adventures that you can think of. Like,
you're like, what if unicorns and horses and elephants all loved each other so much?
I was waiting to see where you were going with that.
I'm just saying, like, your mind just does the things that are like impossible.
Yeah, it's just like, so I feel like when we like unicorns and horses all love each other.
This is where I am tonight.
I'm like, aren't unicorns and horses the same?
No.
I mean, not the same, but like they're in the same family.
Horses think they are, but they're not. Unicorns are like...
I mean, unicorns are obviously
unicorns are like
more stellar, magical, mystical, amazing, majestic situation.
Yeah.
But they're in the same family as horses.
I guess.
Right?
Yeah.
They eat. It's like we evolved from apes.
Yes.
Unicorns evolved from.
Yes, that's true.
Horses.
That's true. That's a correct analogy.
Some fairy came along and sprinkled a horse with something, and then it became a unicorn.
True that. That.
Maybe somebody will come along and sprinkle something on these systems.
Fairy dust. This is me sprinkling.
What a fairy godmother you are.
Fix it.
On our little sign on our table, it says #FixItJesus.
It doesn't, does it? Did we change it?
Yeah, they changed it.
Oh yeah, I love it. Fix it, Jesus, please.
Please. Jesus, the universe.
Jesus is fixing it through people like you and I and
that's true.
Other people who are doing amazing things in mental health and making sure people get the information, resources, access, and support that they need.
Yes. Yeah, I always think of that story. I think I've told you this before. There's like a parable. I can't think of it right now, of course, because we've been talking for almost 12 hours at this point. Like, we've been talking all day long.
All day.
And we're probably getting to the end of our time here.
I think we are.
We might just be rambling at this point. Who even knows?
We totally are.
But anyways, this parable about this guy that's like stuck on an island. And he's like praying to Jesus to help him.
Yeah.
And like a boat comes by.
Oh, yeah,
and they're like, come on the boat. And he's like, I'm waiting for Jesus to save me. And the boat leaves. And then like a big like ship comes by. And they're like, get on. And he's like, I'm waiting for Jesus to save me.
Yeah.
And so the ship leaves.
Yep.
And then like, you know, another something comes by and he's like, I'm waiting for Jesus, and then he dies.
Yeah.
And he goes to heaven and he's like, why didn't you
he's
save
like,
me?
Yo,
and he's
Jesus.
like, I sent you a boat, a ship, whatever the third raft was. Like, these are the things.
Yeah.
Did you think I was coming down? I've only come one time. I'm only coming one more time.
Yeah.
I sent you the boat.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, that's like what I think you're saying Jesus is doing with us and other people.
Yeah.
And regardless of whatever your religious beliefs are.
Yeah.
Whether it's Jesus or the universe
whatever.
and all of the things of life that there are people, it's like Mr. Rogers says, look for the helpers.
Look for the helpers.
There are helpers and there are good people that are out here.
Yep.
Trying to create ways and find the other helpers and band together and make change policies.
Yeah.
Take these old pipelines and be like, I think these things have asbestos. Maybe we should do something different, not use them.
These pipelines are leaching.
This is not a good stitch.
That is not a good stitch. That's a whole nother episode I just thought of. So Podunk Pipeline.
I'm so glad you thought the word podunk out of nowhere today.
I think because I saw Moira. She's definitely said the word podunk.
Oh, yeah.
In Schitt's Creek.
Yeah,
at some point.
First of all, we could probably pull so many podcast names just out of Schitt's Creek.
I don't know why we haven't done that.
Let's just go right back to our inspirational roots for everything.
Literally. What else is there?
I mean...
Like, I saw Moira tell David to fold in cheese today, and look.
And Podunk Pipeline it is. David,
oh my gosh.
Fold in the cheese.
This is how you do it. You fold it in.
If people don't watch Schitt's Creek, you can find it on Hulu. It's also now on that channel Freevee, which I just found on
What's Freevee?
I don't know. It came up on one of my apps on my TV the other day.
For real V?
It's really free.
Oh.
I was like, can I cancel my Hulu?
It's really free?
Yeah.
For how long?
I don't know, ever. The name of the channel is Freevee. It better not suddenly change to pay me.
You're on fire today. Slay me.
Red, red wine.
Oh my God, I was singing this to myself earlier as I was.
You were?
Yeah.
You were slanging some red wine.
I was singing it. I was thinking of Bob Marley. Okay. So I think we've come to the end.
I don't think Bob Marley sings Red, Red Wine.
Who sings that?
Pretty sure it's not Bob Marley.
Isn't it? There is definitely a Bob Marley version of that song. No, don't play with me.
I'm gonna have to really push back and say that there's no Bob Marley version of Red, Red Wine. I could be wrong.
Some guy named UB40. It was definitely Bob Marley. We'll call it Bob Marley.
Okay, so we want to make sure that
so
everyone...
now that we know that you were wrong about Red, Red Wine. Why am I this way? That I have to be like, just to be clear, you were wrong.
I'm like, I was really...
So rude. By the way, don't ever do that to me.
I was... Don't worry, I won't. I was really just like convinced, but you know.
I get it. It's been a day.
It's been a day. So
we've talked about a lot of pipelines,
yes.
and we've decided that they are full of asbestos. None
Incorrect.
of them are in working order.
Not helpful.
But we are currently working on them.
Yes.
And we have lots of other people that will hopefully be with us working on them.
Yes.
And we'll be revisiting all of the different things that we've talked about today. I think in full, like we'll definitely have full episodes about boarding and
Sit,
you know,
Mama.
different levels of care. I think
sit.
we talked about today: inpatient,
Good
outpatient,
girl.
partial hospitalization, all of those things.
So, if you want to stick around for the meditation, you should.
The meditation.
The meditation. And make sure you rate, subscribe, and review.
Yes.
Please.
Look at you. Look at you with pulling together this ending.
And
It's amazing.
also, we love you.
Also, a much love
Much love.
from the Easy Speak Speakeasy. See you soon.
Bye.